Welcome to micro lecture 2-3 of the Legal and Governance series. It is about the choice between different modes of governance. In this micro lecture, we will first describe the factors that influence the choice between different modes of governance, and more specifically, the combination of factors that results in a situation where network governance is more likely to be chosen than markets or hierarchies. Once these networks have been chosen as a mode of governance, additionally, social mechanisms can be used to cover certain governance problems, and we will describe that in the second part of this micro lecture. This is all related to a paper by Jones and others. It's a somewhat older paper, but it is to be regarded as a classic, and the factors that are described in this paper are still relevant today. We presume that you have watched 2.1 and 2.2 before this lecture, because they describe markets, hierarchies and networks as modes of governance and how the transaction costs are related to that. And these transaction costs are also to some extent used in this paper. Now let's start with the basic structure of the paper. It is represented in this graphical representation that's also in the paper. Now, in the left part of the figure, you see a number of exchange conditions that play a role in explaining the choice between modes of governance. There are 4: demand uncertainty, task complexity, human asset specificity, and frequency. Now, the label on top says interaction of exchange conditions, and the word interaction here means that a combination of these factors will result in the choice for a specific mode of governance, and that is network governance. So a specific combination of these 4 factors will result in a situation where network governance is usually preferred above market or hierarchy conditions. And this is indicated in the box to the right, which is labeled structural embeddedness. And this is another word for network cooperation or network governance. So instead of structural embeddedness, you can read network governance. Now, once network governance is there and chosen by the companies that work together, they enable a number of social mechanisms that can be used in order to govern their interactions. These are restricted access, macroculture, collective sanctions, and reputation. And these 4 will be described in the second part of the paper, and therefore also in the second part of this micro lecture. Now, the most central claim of the paper is that it is a combination of high demand uncertainty and high human asset specificity that results in network governance. Now, in order to understand this claim, it's good to start with looking at these 2 factors separately. The first factor is that of demand uncertainty, and it refers to uncertainty on what to produce and possibly when. It might be the case that today you are producing a certain good and there is high demand for it, but in a couple of months' time the demand changes and you are forced to produce something else. Now, of course, the consequence of this is that you need a production process with a high level of flexibility. And the modes of governance that are particularly able to do that are that of market and network. The best example is that of market. Of course, market governance means that you involve a lot of subcontractors or suppliers in doing the activity that you are doing, in making your product. Now, if in a couple of months you need something else to be produced, you just hire new partners. You search for new partners, of course, under competitive conditions, and the new ones will be able to efficiently produce the new good, and there's no problem. Under network conditions, there is also a possibility for flexibility, provided that the network partners that you have a lot of variety. They have the possibility to produce different goods and services. So in general, network conditions can produce flexibility as well, but they're not as flexible as market conditions. Now, the mode of governance that's particularly not able to cope with flexibility is that of hierarchy. So a high need for flexibility moves away from hierarchy and in-company solutions. Why is this the case? Of course, in hierarchy, you need to do everything with your own personnel and your own technology. This involves a lot of specific investments, and it might involve switching costs, because if you need to produce something else, it might be the case that the technology is of no longer use, and the people that you hired to do the work are of no use as well, because they were experts in producing what you are doing today. Another factor that plays a role, and we know this from the organizational model that we discussed before, is that organizations or hierarchies don't like change, and they are not very good in creating innovative and creative solutions. So this is why flexibility moves you away from hierarchy. The second factor is that of specific investments that are related to customized exchanges. These specific investments, they can be either in human assets, so specific expertise that is needed to produce the goods, or in capital, or in other words, the technology that you use to produce the goods. Now, we already know that under market conditions, it is particularly difficult to have high specific investments, because the reason is you have non-durable relations. Relations might change very often, and under these conditions it's very difficult to recoup the investments done in specific exchanges. So the modes of governance that are more able to cope with the need for high specific investments are hierarchies, and to a certain extent also market networks. The reason is that you need repeated exchange, as already indicated, longer term relations, and also you need to be able to coordinate your activities better in order to recoup the costs. And this can better be done under hierarchy and network conditions. The main point to keep in mind is that the need for specific exchanges takes you away from market as a governance mode. Now, if we combine these two factors, if both factors have a high value, then of course it drives you away from both hierarchies and markets. Uncertainty drives you away from hierarchy, the need for asset specificity drives you away from markets, and the result is that network governance is the most viable or the most attractive mode of governance, because it can cope with both conditions to a certain extent. The next factor is that of task complexity, and it is particularly relevant in combination with a high time pressure. Now, complex tasks result in a need for many specialists, and of course you can understand that if you would do that in your own company under hierarchy, you need to hire a lot of different experts, and that is difficult. So it's more easy to do that under market or network conditions, where you can combine the different specialists from different organizations by either hiring them or by working with them together in durable relations under network conditions. Now, time pressure makes it difficult to use sequential coordination. If it's needed to do things quickly, then it's difficult to make use of the mechanism that first one company does something to the product, it produces something that you buy as a supply, and that you use to sequential after that do your work in terms of making your own product. If there is a high time pressure, that's not feasible. You need to coordinate activities continuously, and this can of course be done more easily in hierarchies, but also under network conditions, because under network conditions you are used to working with each other, and it's more easy to coordinate your activities. Again, the combinations of these two factors, complexity and time pressure, drive you away from both hierarchies and markets, and thus result in a high likelihood that network governance will be chosen. The final factor is that of frequency. Exchanges might be frequent, and if they are happening frequently, this is a reason to move away from market governance. The reason is that the information costs that are involved in finding the right partners and the bargaining costs that are involved in settling the deals happen very often if you have frequent exchanges, and then of course they are high as well. Frequency is also an important enabler of network relations. Networks develop because you have shared experience and you know the partners that you are working with. And if these exchanges happen often, of course also the network relations develop rather quickly. Let me stress that the idea that it is the combinations of the four factors that result in network governance. So it's not the single factors that play a role. For instance, if we look at demand uncertainty, the fact that there is high demand uncertainty as such does not, for instance, drive you away from markets, because markets are perfectly able to cope with that. It's the combination with the need for specific investments that drives you away from markets and hierarchies, and that results in networks. It's important to understand that these factors that we are talking about, they will vary in practice. So different companies will face different conditions. Some companies will face high demand uncertainties, others will face low demand uncertainties, and thus the situation that they find themselves in will be different. It's even the case that if organizations are involved in producing different goods, that the situation will be different for the different products that they make. It might be the case that for one product the demand uncertainty is high, and for another product the demand uncertainty is low. And as a consequence, they might choose for instance, network governance for one product and markets or hierarchies for another product. Now let's move to the second part of the paper. That is about the social mechanisms that become available once a network is in place. So once network governance has been chosen as the mode of governance for the different companies to cooperate. What these networks do is, in the first place, they transfer knowledge. The organizations work together very often, they communicate very often, and this makes sure that if one of the partners gets certain knowledge, for instance about the credibility of the other partners, this can be shared quite quickly through the network because they have lots of contact. The second part is that networks enable the spread of norms and value that are indications of how organizations should behave in certain situations. These are usually shared in networks, and thus they can be used in order to make sure that organizations behave in the way as they are expected in the network. The second part of the paper is represented in this picture. To the left we see the different social mechanisms that are distinguished. They are restricted access, macroculture, collective sanctions, and reputation. Now these can be used in order to solve two exchange problems that exist, particularly in network cooperation. The first is that of coordination. Coordination is the question, how do we come to an agreement of what we should do together in the network? How can we coordinate activities in such a way that the best results are produced? The second problem is that of safeguarding. Safeguarding refers to the situation that it might be possible that partners do not live up to the promises, to the agreement that was made. This was earlier indicated by the idea of opportunistic behavior. So how can we make sure that the partners do not behave opportunistically in the network? The first mechanism is that of restricted access, and it refers to the type of actors that are allowed to the network. Now, if the actors that are allowed to the network are more similar, that improves the possibility for coordination. Basically because they have the same ideas of what should be done and also the same possibilities to do certain things. That also reduces the possibility of opportunistic behavior. If actors are more similar, it's more likely that they have the same interests, and then they do not have many reasons to behave different than other actors in the network would expect from them. However, it is important to stress that, of course, some diversity is necessary for networks in order to become profitable. Yeah, if all members are exactly the same in the network, there is no real use of working together in a network. The very reason why you want networks why networks are beneficial is that you can combine the different abilities, the different technologies, the different expertise of the partners. So you need some variety in terms of the resources that the actors have in order to become profitable in terms of doing different things and developing new and innovative products. So it's important to understand that yes, restricted access may play a role in making life more easy, but you need to find a balance between the fact that actors need to be somewhat different, but not too different. Now, actors can be more or less similar because of restricted access, but also because of a macro culture. That refers to a system of widely shared assumptions and values in, for instance, the industry. This is related to how experts are trained in the industry and the occupational norms and values that come with it. They provide, for instance, a common language, and this results in the fact that when someone tells you something, you immediately know what he or she means because you have the same background. Again, this increases the likelihood of coordination because it's more easy to get to agreements on what should be done. The next mechanism is that of collective sanctions, and it plays a role in preventing opportunistic behavior and safeguarding interactions. Now, if someone is behaving opportunistically, and I know this as a member of the network, of course I will try to sanction that behavior. But because this knowledge is shared within the network, the other partner might face sanctions not only from me, but also from the other members in the network. And of course, that increases the cost of opportunistic behavior for him. Might even face the fact of becoming expelled from the network. And of course that is very unattractive if you want to stay in the network. The next mechanism works basically in the same way. It's that of reputation. It is about providing information on the reliability, the goodwill and the quality of the work of members. And of course the previous one was related to actual sanctioning. The idea of reputation is you don't even need to sanction the behavior because people are afraid of their reputation. They want to have a good reputation. And just the fact that they want to have a good reputation makes sure that they will keep up the promises and do as they are expected. Okay, that's it. It's time to wrap up. In this micro lecture, we discussed the factors that influence the choice between modes of governance. Let me stress again, it's the combination of different factors that explain the choice for modes of governance. And it's also important to understand that if organizations find themselves sometimes in situations where network governance is most likely, but in other situations they will most likely choose for the alternatives for markets or hierarchies. In the second part of the paper we discussed how social mechanisms can be used in order to improve the coordination in networks and the safeguarding of interactions.